So the session that we're going to be looking at is Recalibrate Your Life. I worked with my friend Stephen Krotz, and we come up with ideas, and then we come up with and then so we it evolved into this funny thing. So you can see the voyage of life, and it's a very brief voyage, but it's full of dangers, toils, and snares. The Scylla and the Charybdis that he has to avoid. But then he gets to the other side. Here's a dolphin, and here's a rainbow, and he gets to the outward lands. You don't see anything beyond that, but we get safely to the other side. So the symbol really is this, that all of us, effectively, are actually voyagers. So we're aliens, pilgrims, strangers, and exiles in this world. And the way I see that, then, is this idea of a metaphor, where our earthly journey is really described with these 7 metaphors. I just added the last one, Tenet. I saw that in Exodus. And this is the point. The more you grasp who and whose you are in this world, the more you grasp the brevity of the earthbound sojourn, that you're not home yet, that you are actually in between 2 worlds, that you're a spiritual being having an earthbound embodied experience, that you're in a soul-forming world. And that the purpose of this world, then, is to prepare us for our eternal citizenship in heaven. So we hold things loosely with a loose grip. So that grasping that eternal perspective in the temporal arena is a path that leads to great wisdom for us. So that's sort of the symbolism that's involved in the cover. But essentially, the contents are pretty simple. I've always been big on alliteration, so here are 3 Ps. Perspective, what gives meaning to life. Leaving a godly legacy, numbering your days, treasuring God and people, moving from career to calling, developing a better vision of retirement, because most people fritter away their best years on selfish indulgence rather than grasping, no, the best is yet to come, and you have a higher stewardship than ever before, and you'll be held accountable for it. And it's a tragic loss and a great waste that people retire before they should. You don't retire from your vocation, from your calling. You may retire from a career, but never from a calling. Your vocation is there, and each phase in your life is actually developed so that there's a layering effect such that each component then prepares you for the next stage in your journey. If you walk in a matter of having fidelity and the pursuit of truth, the more you do that, the more you'll see that your life, even looking back from a backward perspective, becomes a narrative, a journey, a pathway, and you're not going in a spiral. There's a telos, there's a direction to which you're going, you see. So you're heading somewhere, you're heading home. And that's the whole idea, that we love this idea of having a sense of what is home about. So I'll say a word about that in a moment. Then the idea of, as well, what gives direction to life. And so understanding God's purposes, his ultimate purpose, and why he made anything, and his unique and his universal purpose, why all of us as believers share the same universal purpose. And that universal purpose is to know Christ and make him known. It's basically intimacy, and then it's going to be influence. That is to say, it's going to be edification and evangelism. I call it E squared. And E squared is really the nature of the life, that you are both to grow in him and become more and more conformed to the image of his Son, but you're also supposed to reproduce. And so that's what happens as you abide in Christ. There's a little trilogy I use all the time. I'll mention it later again, perhaps. I use it all throughout the day. And it is trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit. Very Trinitarian, because it gives me a very simple understanding of what my role is right at this moment in time. Am I trusting in the Father? Because I'm never going to understand his ways, yet not even the fringe of his ways. He didn't ask me to understand him, he asked me to trust him. And that takes a childlike sense of ownership and what that looks like. But then to abide in the Son is to draw your life from him, because you were never meant to create life. You were meant to receive and reflect his life. So Jesus Christ gave his life for you so he could give his life to you, so he could live his life through you as you. It's a whole dynamic there whereby you don't create life. You are a conduit of the vine. You see, and that whole idea is that you receive the vitality of the vine, but you're not an endpoint. What does the sap intended to do? What's it produce? Excess life. So I've been calling you that you would produce life much, and that your fruit would remain fruit, more fruit, much fruit. What does fruit contain? Two things. It has the seed for its own reproduction, and secondly, it nourishes others, evangelism and edification. So the idea that the fruit is born in you and through you, as you, but not by you. So there's an understanding of what that inside-out life is involved in. So to abide in the Son, then, is to not try to create life or make it happen, but actually to depend upon Him as my conduit of life. So everything matters, every person, no small things, events, and details. And then walk by the Spirit, so that what is animated and energized by the Spirit is actually going to be something that's going to be pleasing to God. Because before you knew Christ, you didn't have the option to be pleasing to God. Now, as a follower of Jesus, you have options you didn't have before, because you were held captive to do His will. The enemies and the world, the flesh, and the devil were defining of you. But now you're defined by a new reality. You are a spiritual being having this brief, earthbound sojourn, that dash between the dates. And in this earthbound sojourn, you're called to actually mature and become more and more like Christ. So I'll say a bit more about that as we go. And then third, so then there's a unique purpose, by the way. Not only are all called to edification and evangelism in one way or another, through the unique prism of their personality, but also you have a unique purpose, a unique way in which you're going to do that, express that no one else can quite do. Because you see, you were designed by God because He loves variety and beauty and loves that. This thing is falling off here. Get that back one. And therefore, just as you see plants and no two are identical, so also He wants to use the uniqueness and the prism of your personality to accomplish things that no one else can quite do. You will uniquely reflect and refract the glory of God in a way that no one else does. But you also, by the way, because we all have a flesh signature, will uniquely distort that glory as well, to a way that no one else does. And so every day it's a choice of training ourselves, not trying, training. Because as we train ourselves in righteousness, we become more conformed to His image. And if you applied the same minimal structure, the minimal effort that you apply to learning a skill, learning a language, becoming proficient at a sport, learning an instrument, that same degree of discipline and training would free you to be able to do something that's beautiful with it after a period of apprenticeship. And so it is in this spiritual life. In a very real sense, we're apprentices in kingdom living, and we're designed and drawn to become more and more, bearing more fruit and further up and further in. So it's not a diminishment. Each thing leads to the next. So how does that unique purpose get prized? And then finally, practice. How do I wisely invest my life? Now we're dealing with this matter of stewardship, time, talent, treasure, truth, and relationships. And indeed, I have two more than other people usually do. And I think that's correct for various reasons. But when I think about the idea of stewardship, it looks like this. So this is the typical three. But the one of them that's missing is truth and relation. Two that they're missing. I believe that truth is as much a matter of stewardship as is time, talent, and treasure. And I think relationships, I couldn't find a good T for that. I mean, I've had suggestions, team and so forth. They're forced. And so I don't want to force an alliteration, but you get the idea. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that we're called to do something. We're called to be prudent and to leverage. That's part of the purpose of the book, Leverage, is to leverage that which is passing away. And you can be pretty sure that those are all passing away. The world is passing away and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. But there's something that we can leverage. We can take that which is passing away and turn it into that which is going to endure forever. That's why in Luke 16, Jesus says, make friends for yourself, therefore, by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, and that's when you die, there are going to be people who receive you into eternal dwellings. Because you see, you're not here to actually you're not home. And the danger is the more affluence we have, the more tethered we are to this world, and the more of its power, its grasp, its pull. Money, as I said in my session yesterday, is not neutral. It has a pull, as does sex and power. Each can be leveraged, though, for the glory of God. Because not that they're neutral, but they can leverage. So how do I overcome the gravity of the flesh and the world and the devil? I use the aerodynamics of the Spirit of God. So while that gravity is always there, there's also the aerodynamics, the principle of differential lift. And when that occurs, then you have a higher principle that doesn't defeat gravity, but it overcomes it. And now, instead of walking around like turkeys, we can soar with the wings of eagles because we ride the thermals of the Spirit. And so it's no longer us trying to do it, but Christ doing it in us and through us as us. And this is why the whole idea of not trying to do things for Jesus. Don't do things for him. Ask him to do things through you. And it's a huge difference. We're trying to say, how is that? We're doing things in the power of the flesh. No, everything is in fact designed to last. But that which is done in the power of the Spirit will last. So here, you're leveraging into the two things that will go on into eternity, because the Word of God will endure forever. And you've never met a mere mortal, as C.S. Lewis describes it in The Weight of Glory. You've never met a mere mortal. And so when you do that, then you're living wisely and well, and with a sense of prudence and understanding and discernment that makes complete sense. So that's part of the point of that. I'm going back now for a moment, back to our book. I'm just pulling out a few selected places, because how am I going to teach a book? So I'm just giving some things that I would probably pull to summarize the essence of this book. One of them is the difference between the kairos recalibration and the chronos recalibration. And what I mean by that has to do with the issue of your view of time. Because when you're dealing with chronos, that's the word chronometer, chronology. It's the word, it's something you plan. It's something you can plan. And that's in the mundane and the ordinary. So you have a place and a time. But there's another form of time that's not on your calendar. And it's opportunity time, making the most of your days, because the chiron are evil, the days, the opportunities. And so the question is how God provides opportunities for us. And the normal stance will be, until we train ourselves to grasp them and be receptive to them, the normal stance is to regard them as interruptions to our plans. I invite you to see them as invitations to God's plans. That the most important thing that will happen to this day, in terms of the economy of the kingdom of God, will not be in your planner. So if you look back on that, it'll be an unexpected meeting, something that happened, that God put you together, and be open to that. And it requires a measure of humility. You have to deny yourself. You have to empty and divest yourself, empty yourself of your plans and your illusions, that you know what your best interests look like. This is one of the fundamental things that people have to understand. Two things, really. Number one, God's in control and you're not. That takes a while to figure that one out. But when you finally come to admit that, you don't control anything. At the same time, he has your best interests at heart. That's harder for us to buy. You see, it's true that you have to be omniscient to know your best interest, because you can judge according to appearances. But you see, you go to a fork in the road, and as Yogi Berra said, when you reach a fork in the road, take it. The idea of a fork in the road forces a choice, you see, and one thing will lead to another. So how do you know what the outcome will be? Maybe what looks like the most favorable road turns out to be a dead end, a cul-de-sac. And then you ever go past an exit on an interstate, and the next one's 5 miles, so you have now a privilege of going 5 more miles to go back, and then another 5 miles back to get where you started. Life is too important to the art of staying off dead-end streets is wise. And so that's why the Proverbs talk about two forms of wisdom. One, you live and learn. The other is a better one, learn and live. And so but we'll always still go through the school of hard knocks, as Will Durant put it. Good decisions come from experience, and most of that comes from bad decisions. It's the fool, though, who repeats the same year 40 times. It's the wise person who learns from their mistakes, doesn't chide himself, beat himself up, but thanks him for the grace of insight. And then you're now privileged to make new kinds of decisions that you could have made, you see. And so it'll go up, because God will continue to layer it, because it's like an iceberg, and most of it's underneath the waterline, you see. And so he'll never stop teaching and never stop training you. It's always a process of growth. But the danger that we have is that while in our younger years, what's our problem in our youth? What's our challenge in our youth? I would say naivete and lack of focus. They're open to anything. So that's why the wise and the foolish are appealed to in the souk, in the marketplace. In our middle years, I think our biggest challenge is double-mindedness and entanglement. Trying to play by two sets of rules, you see. Having the illusion that you're the source of your provision, and that you know better than God what your best interests look like, which is folly. Only God could know what that looks like. And then, but I think in our later years, you know what our biggest challenge is? Something that's worse than hardening of the arteries. It's called hardening of the categories. Unteachability. When you're not, your categories are so rigid, so inflexible, so as a consequence, they're just exactly the opposite of Psalm 92 at the end. The righteous man will flourish like the palm tree. He will grow like a cedar in Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will, I love this, still yield fruit in old age. They will be full of sap and very green. Isn't that a wonderful image? Their fluidity is such that they can never continue. You just stop. And apart from dementia or some other kind of physical malady, there's no reason why you shouldn't go further up and further in. Most people just settle for mediocrity. And it's beneath the dignity of the calling, the high calling to which God's called us. So he wants us to have this thing, what I call the second naivete is what I describe it as. The first naivete is childishness. But we learn to put away childish things. But there's another kind of naivete you do not want to, that you must cultivate. Childlikeness. A childlike sense of wonder and awe and the realization that everything is full of surprise. And you are at play in the fields of the living God, and you're surrounded right now and immersed in mystery, which is an astonishing thing. So when I think about, I just love being here, and I take photos like this because it gives me a rich pleasure to see this beauty and the fauna that I don't get to usually see when I'm in Atlanta. I like how this one turned out because you see how it reflects off of that at that time of day. So that was a lovely thing to do. And so I just love these these cactus. And just looking at beauty, what am I looking at here? So I see this thing, and it's a marvel to behold. Boundless complexity. You see, I love beauty, and I'm drawn to it. It draws me to mystery, because you see, beauty connects mystery with goodness and truth. So it's in display, and even in the fallen world, you see this glory of God, how it manifests. And then doing studies of these things, you see, beginning to look at the marvels of God and seeing things with new eyes, training yourselves to have an acuity. I took these last night of the wonderful, I used to be an astronomer, so I love that, this imagery here. And then this morning, and so just wonderful beauties and things. This is a tree that, so I'm just saying that you need to train yourself to be aware, open your eyes to see what's already around you. You're surrounded by ineffable beauty in the microcosm, midcosm, and macrocosm. Most people don't even notice it. You should be paying attention to the beauty that you're immersed in right now. And as you do it, God says, I'm glad you noticed, because it's doxological. And it glorifies God. The more you see, the more you're able to see. So now what I do is I'm all the time, now when I'm driving, instead of listening to audiobooks, I'm always doing this.
Offerings to her. Was it without our husbands that we...
This is Jeremiah. I've been at it for 3 months. Every time I drive and every time I'm washing up, I have this thing on. It's gone from Genesis to Jeremiah in 3 months. And I'm driving then, the second thing I do while I'm hearing the word is this. I'm looking at the world, and I'm training myself to see new architectures. I've become familiar with trees, certain friends, because no two are alike. And I see the dendritic architecture, and it's exquisite and astonishing. I'm a scientist. I'm a generalist, so I synthesize and translate and apply. But as a scientist, I'm training myself to have a greater visual acuity, and the more I see, the more I'm able to see. So after a while, you get dazzled and marveled. So that beauty of both the world and the word, they go together. So this is an understanding. So I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I'm going to go back into the book again. So here we are. So this kairos, because a kairos recalibration is perhaps your routine that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. That whole idea of memento mori, it used to be a big theme. Let me see if I can find it for you. If it's not easy to find, I'll give it up, but let me see. I think I have memento mori here. Yeah. No, it's spiritual. It's under the spiritual category. There it is. I was preaching at this church, First Church of Christ in Wethersfield, Connecticut. It was a church that Jonathan Edwards grew up in, although not the same building. But this is pretty an old building, and you had to go up the stairs, you see, to go up to this place. Very interesting, because I had to go up these stairs, you see, and I'm looking down on the audience, you see, and they have the sacred canopy above you there, so we're glad that thing didn't break. But it's like it'd be like a snuffer. It'd snuff you out for sure. But there were two objects on there, and that things people who go to that church never noticed. They thought it was decoration. This object and this object. Those are memento mori. And in the 18th century, 19th century, both of those, there was a lot more of use of the momentum. Remember, you're going to die. And so another image of it is this, and so you can see. So I preached there once, and I said, next time I go there, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something that's different. I'm going to, their graveyard, they have this, the ancient burying ground here. The guy died in 1744. They had these grotesque skulls and things you probably don't want to have on your gravestones, like these very strange things. Here lies the body. And so what they have, and they're right outside their window, and they're seeing these things. They're surrounded by that. And then I showed them this painting, and this painting, this whole idea of the ambassadors. And so Hans Holbein does something tricky in this. He shows these two people at the height of their careers and the symbols of their achievements, and also some problems that there were also there was discord, lots of symbolism. What's this object that we behold? But beneath them, you see, what is this object that we're seeing? Whoop, I meant to go this way. Yeah, I go this way, that way. What is that object that they're seeing? Well, it turns out it's an anamorphic painting. It's designed to be set on a stairway so that when you're going down the stairs, you'll look down the right angle, down on the painting. And when you do that, that's what this thing becomes that. That's what they're looking at. That is this, you see. And if you're at the right angle, you'll see it. And why would you have a painting like that? Because it was a design, remember that you're going to die. And this is the whole idea of memento mori. Don't forget that you're brief and your time is brief. So teach us to number your days. But here he says, as for the days of our life, I wonder if that's where they got the soap opera from, the days of our lives, They contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80, but soon they fly away and they're gone. And we're gone like a sigh. And he uses 4 metaphors for the brevity of life. Suppose you were granted 90 years. So I'm going to be generous with you. So you got 90 years. Most people, if they knew that they had that much time, would postpone the decision that you should have been making a lot sooner. They just, I have time, I can deal with it later. So that's why they fall into the folly of treating the temporal as if it was eternal, and the eternal as if it was temporal, that we could postpone it. And so you can't live with foolish. But now it gets more interesting. When I suppose now you knew for sure you have 90 fixed days left. That's it, 90 days. Would that change your view of anything? Is there any degree to which your apprehension of that deadline, literally, would actually affect the way you live now? And if there is, there's some discrepancy between your belief and your behavior. You see, you should be actually living less if you had 90 minutes, because that would be a much wiser way to live, you see, to realize, and then what would be my thoughts at that point? And it's a good exercise for you to chew on. Now I'm going to give you 90 seconds. And it's called sudden doom. And there's, it's interesting, there's a fellow who was EMT, and he would go to accidents, and at first when he saw, this person's not going to make it, they have less than 5 minutes. Sudden doom. Am I going to die? And he'd lie and say, no, you're not going to die. Why am I lying to them on their moment of death? So I started telling them the truth. Yes, you're going to die. You're about to die. 3 things emerged from that. Number 1, Many of them talked about the need for remembrance, to be remembered. Others, the need for forgiveness. And third, the need for meaning. Now, too late, you see. Wouldn't it be wise to live as if this is all you've got? Because the next way I see it is this way. You see, it's more like this. It would be, in fact, how do I know? How do I want to presume that I have a year left? The arrogance that would presuppose, come now you who say today and tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, engage in business and make a profit there. You don't even know what your life is like. Your day is like a vapor. You're just here for the briefest moment, you're gone. Live that way and you'll live prudently. Live only with 2 days in your calendar, today and that day. Living each day like that day, because how can you know it won't be that day? Then you're living well because you're living for the accolades of the king. Because ultimately you're going to be going home. So as you grasp that wisdom of understanding that, and C.S. Lewis put it beautifully in his Weight of Glory sermon, if a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, and because you're an image bearer, it is. He's planted eternity in your heart. Then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious. Do you see the concept that I'm addressing? So it becomes a problematic thing in our life journeys when we don't grasp these things. So in looking at that, then, my main point there in this portion of the book is to emphasize the need for making wise decisions and living each day with 2 days in your calendar, today and that day. And one of the things that I would emphasize as well is the idea of what do you fear more than anything else? Because that's a huge thought with this idea of the attributes of God. And most people don't like this, but I can show you that if you put in a billboard of a church things that relate to this, people would like it. People won't be drawn to this. But I submit to you that's as equally ultimate in the scriptures, because you see what you fear reveals what you love. And what you love reveals what you fear. So at the end of the day, living before the holiness of God becomes a very important exercise. So live with a holy fear that actually of the divine displeasure. That'd be a wiser way for us to live our days. And so live with the end in view, and each day matters to God. And every day will be spent. It'll be squandered or invested, but it'll be never received again. So you understand that. The coffin then becomes an evangelist, speaking to us more eloquently than the cradle. In many ways, when I do a funeral, as I just did very recently, he's the 14th person, oddly, that I've had a relationship with where I knew for sure this will be your last time on this earth where you'll see this person. 14. And I did my friend's funeral, and I spoke to him of the things to come. It was before he died, on his deathbed. But it's a very powerful thing, because I knew the people were miserable in being there. The last place they wanted to be was at that thing, because it reveals and exposes the vapidity, the thinness, the foolishness of the endeavors to which they've committed themselves by pursuing treasures and toys and tinsel and trinkets when infinite joy is offered us. They don't want enough. And how they've been frittering away this great investment. Because the price you pay for something is how much of your life you give to acquire it. And so you have to make sure that you are pursuing those things that God declares to be important. So I deal with that. And I told them about, I gave them the gospel, basically blaming it on Stumpy, the one that whose life they're celebrating, because of how he was changed and so forth. But these are powerful moments that occur to us in this process. And then what we call death is actually a second birth canal. And I'm just throwing in little snippets and vignettes, but there's a unifying theme, as you can probably begin to guess. And so this whole idea of womb world here. So I think about womb world. All of you lived in womb world. I always tell this at a funeral. You don't remember it, do you? But you were floating upside down in your mother's amniotic fluid, and if someone were to knock on the womb and say, "Hey, you want out of here?" I mean, it's a crazy experiment. What would you probably be thinking? What do you mean out of here? This is all there is. There's no other place than this. Secondly, why would I want to leave this? I've got everything. All my needs are being perfect, or air conditioning and awesome place. Everything, all my needs are provided. But to stay in womb world was actually beyond term would be to die. You were only meant to be in there, and you can't be in two worlds at the same time. So when you were birthed into this world, You died to womb world. Does that make sense to you so far? The idea, so you died to one and you were born into another. And so then what happened was things that you could have never begun to imagine take place in this world. The idea of table fellowship with people you love and sharing a beautiful sunset and those kinds of things and on and on and on. This is a second womb. You see, this world is a larger, wider womb to prepare us for eternal, the Zoe of God. And so the Zoe, bios is physical life, Zoe is spiritual life. I've come to give them life that they may have it abundant. That's the second birth. So the one who has the second, he who is born twice dies once. He was born once dies twice. So we're not in the land of the living going to the land of the dying. We're in the land of the dying, heading toward the land of the living from a biblical standpoint. So what I argue then is actually what we call death is a second birth canal. So that then we go into where we were being prepared. You see, this is a soul-forming world. And just as your body was being formed, now your soul is being formed. And it's a preparatory journey in this earthbound sojourn to become more and more conformed to the image of Christ. It's a powerful concept to me. What's interesting, however, is that a lot of people, most of us can remember the decade birthdays, to go back to when you were 10 years old, remember 20 years old, and so forth. And it's almost as if it was yesterday in some ways. I remember some of those birthdays like that. What's fascinating, though, is that people zoom more and more into this one area, this finite thing, and they get all focused. So when they get at this point here, they're thinking about their career, and then they're thinking about their family, they're thinking about their children and grandchildren, and so then they're thinking about this, that, and the other. And they're spending so much of their time thinking about that they act as if there's nothing beyond the grave, even though obviously it's intuitively obvious. But the point is that what's fascinating, if you knew that you only had 80 years in heaven, but the quality of that 80 years would be dazzling in comparison, who wouldn't want to then endure the adversities of 80 years in order to endure infinite and boundless pleasure? But the beauty of this is it's more like this. And so our life is like this, and it goes on and on, so I see it. And if we could really begin to grasp it, this 80 years, I'm being generous, is like a fleeting moment. And so and then it goes on. And imagine the implications if the quality of your life now had an impact on eternity. How you live now has an effect. Jesus talked about having a portfolio that will not let you down, where thieves can't rob and others cannot destroy, that you have a security, and your portfolio is in your intimacy and your relationship with the living God. It just goes on and on. Look at how, so who knows what implications it's going to have. There's all kinds of weird things that will start happening. Who knows? This is my crazy speculation. But the idea is it's going to go on forever. And if I can just train people to long for home, so I talk about that in the book as well, the whole idea of heaven, and we're cultivating an appetite for heaven. And so a lot of this book is about recalibrating, but how can you know where to recalibrate if you don't know where you're going? So you have to live with the end in view. So, but as Kierkegaard put it, life is lived forward but understood backward. So as you gain wisdom and insight, then you look back, I see now. But being receptive and open and teachable and trainable, so that you begin to accrue and gain wisdom, so that the interior life is growing. And I do more and more exercises. I want people to become increasingly homesick and world-weary. Paul said to me, to live as Christ is gain. To live as Christ is, and to die as gain. If he's saying, I'm eager to be with him, and be with him is better, why is it that most believers are fearing of death? They're thinking about what they have to leave behind. And then if they had 90 seconds left, they'd be thinking about, probably most of them, about the wrong thing. They'd be thinking about their children, their grandchildren, and so forth. Wrong answer. It comes down to three questions. What do you seek? Who do you say I am? Do you love me more than these? He will brook no rival. But the beauty is this. When I love him more than my relatives, my family, my friends, indeed everything, then I discover that I can love them more than if I love my family more than him. He's not the enemy. He's the animator, the energizer of our love. So I try to help people see that. And there are these things that God gives us as hints of home. as Lewis describes it, patches of godlight. And beauty, experiences of beauty, intimacy, and adventure are wonderful things. And so in letters to Malcolm, he calls them pure and spontaneous pleasures. You know, I think that what's the most beautiful thing you ever saw? It's a pointer of a good that you cannot yet name, but it's going to be more than you can imagine. It's going to be more than worth your while, I promise you. Jesus never invites us to sacrifice something, to give up something without a greater good. There's no appeal to dying before him and to losing something without associated with a greater good. Because he wired us for profit. Just make sure that what you define profit is how God defines it. And use the right price tags, because Satan and the world has changed the price tags and told us to treasure the trinkets and tinsel and sawdust. And so it will be in our mouths after a certain point. So we have to, are we going to take this very seriously or not? But they are pointers. What's the greatest moment think about it for a second. What's the greatest of beauty that you've ever experienced? It was so dazzling that it made you weep. And you wanted to share it with someone else because it's corporate, it's communal, you see. What's the greatest moment of intimacy you've known? Again, something to be shared. The greatest adventure you've known. I submit to you that those greatest moments are only hints of home. They're pointers to a greater good so great you cannot yet name it because you don't have the capacity to name it, but you will not be disappointed. So it's a perspective then. And so as I see it then, I look at it this way. I ran into this photo of Harold Whittles, and it was 1974. They put a special device in his ear, and he was able to hear for the first time. I want you to notice his face. It symbolizes something for me. I think a lot about this picture now. You'll notice for the first time he hears fear and wonder, you see. And to me, that's what, if I'd only known. So I use that as I promise you, when you see the glory of God, you will then be realizing, if I'd only known. It's a great vision that God has called us to pursue. So it's a lovely picture. The patches of Godlight. Leave each day if it were last. Here's something I'd like to share with you that I found extraordinarily meaningful. Why do we save the best words for people at their funerals? The film to see is Waking Ned Devine, where the guy gets a funeral. He's sitting in the front row. It's brilliant. But the idea of why do we hold our love? Who are the people who've shaped you? Have you spoken your love? Have you spoken your gratitude? Is there any unfinished business between you? Because you don't want to go into eternity with those things not being resolved. Do you understand that idea? So I seek to do that. Do it today. Don't wait until later on. While you have opportunity, do that. And so treat each person as if you'll never see them again, and that would be a prudent way to live, because how do you know you will? So that's a perspective again. So the book approaches this from different angles, and I'm just selecting things. I said already that our God-given calling, or vocari is the word, and can be defined as an unchanging reason for being. That you may have different careers, but he keeps defining you and redefining you and shaping you and keep preparing you for the next thing. And each one, as you follow and walk in obedience, opens up the opportunity for next layer. Although a lot of people stunt their growth by refusal to take the risks of obedience. Because after all, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. It takes great rest to treasure the things that are not yet over the now, and the things that are unseen over what is visible, obviously. So there's a great tension between those two. And frankly, that's a whole discussion. I don't know. Should I throw it in? I've always got these decision points in my mind, you see, where I'm trying to decide whether I should do this thing or not. But this whole idea of the vocation, the vocari, the calling to which we've been given, is a powerful thing. I think I'll skip that and go to the next one here. So I go to the next one here. Several purpose statements. We talk about this because most people have, many business people have a purpose statement for their business, but not one for their lives, which is astonishing to me. They haven't thought it through. So we offer very practical things. We have actually 18 tools in this little book to help people in their recalibration. So you could choose one of these things. It's better to have something and then try it out and then see it and go from there. Lose my life, count everything as lost, based in Scripture, or some extra biblical sources. Various people have written their purpose statements as well. I think it's very powerful to have a sense of purpose. And so what you want to do is to seize every opportunity in Kairos and to do what the owner of a clock time desires. Here's a little diagram for you that would be related to this. So if I see it this way, this is brand new. I throw my new heresies out. I'm always coming with new crazy ideas, so I'll just throw this out. So if faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, then the y-axis, the vertical axis, moves us from the seen to the unseen. The x-axis then moves us from the now to the not yet. And so it means there's going to be 4 quadrants, you see. It makes sense, doesn't it? And so you can do a little thing on operations of this. And so the ideal thing is, of course, the ideal growth would be for us to move from quadrant 1 to quadrant 3. Wouldn't it make sense in our spiritual growth? But it never is this, so it's never that way. I mentioned children because I think they're caught between heaven and earth. But as they grow from innocence to experience, and songs of innocence and experience, I won't go into the detail, the harshness of life in a fallen world. Did he who made the lamb make thee? Then they are tethered to number 1 quadrant. But I believe and claim that it's possible to go beyond being a child to being childlike and to having a greater sense of hoping for home and living in the age we are. Think of this a moment. God has empowered you to live out of the power of the coming age in this present darkness. See, you're operating out of resurrected power, are you not? That's the power of the world to come, and he's called you to live that power now. You're living proleptically, it means. It means that you're living the power of the age to come in the present darkness. So that you become an agent, a sign, a symbol, a pointer to God's grace. So through that, then you are drawing people in a winsome way. No, nobody ever gets there, even if they continue to grow. Person blue rises at one course, person green comes at it from another angle. But the interesting thing is the worries of the world, the deceitfulness of riches. That's what would tether us, isn't it, to the first quadrant. And so I believe, though, it's possible to go beyond children, you see, and actually have this childlike wonder and awe that you become more and more conformed to the image of the Son, so you become more prepared for that eternity. And to have a person who can see affinity in eternity. Heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hands and eternity in the hour. And that's why God makes this created order with boundless diversities. It's not a thing you can understand. Pick up a grain of sand, let alone a leaf, let alone an insect, let alone a bird. It'll be full of mystery you can never, ever unpack. You're surrounded by ineffable mystery. And the more I know as a scientist, the more that's becoming clear. But again, it comes down to this thing I mentioned before. If I'd only known, living with that in mind is the way for us to live. So those are just a few thoughts along that line. And I have a couple more minutes to torment you, so I'll give you another thing. Be always a lifelong student and applier of the truth. And that's why I said that our problem in our youth is naivete and lack of focus. The problem in our middle years is double-mindedness and entanglement, trying to play by 2 sets of rules. The problem in our older age is then the loss of being teachable. So the hardening of the categories is worse than the hardening of the arteries. They become inflexible, they become rigid, and they're thinking they're not able to be taught. No, when we do that, when we stop learning, we start dying. And so we're talking then about this whole idea of what does it mean to have or enhanced relational capacity. I do more meditation with my bride on that, about these things. So what I've done with her is I have a video that I've done, 2 videos actually, on this theme here, and where I actually try to take us through this business of heaven. Let me see. I hit the wrong one here. Wrong one there. The heaven one. Yeah, so, okay, this is the heaven. So I've been going through these things. What would it mean to no longer be bound by the pulls of this world system? They're egregious and being amplified by media, where people are being mediaized into imbecility. Social media and so forth, becoming more and more lonely. And another generation of a whole generation, a collective of autists. They're autistic. They can't relate because the digital world is more meaning than the real. And then there's the flesh. What do it mean by having the judgment seat of Christ? I'm terrified of it, but I want it. Because after the judgment seat, you'll never again be able to think sin. It's a wonderful thought. Every desire, it will be there. And then overcoming that. And then, wouldn't it, not bad, no more death, crying, so that life, relationships, and then to be in a resurrected body, and I have a whole series, a teaching on that, on a resurrected world and the unbounded future, because you see, heaven is endless creative activity without frustration to the glory of God. You'll never be bored. And you will now, you'll stop dropping stuff. And everything you desire will be yours. And God will allow you now to be a sub-creator, and wait will you see what you're going to be doing as a gardener in that created order. Start imagining what it would be like to have a perfectly powerful experience of a resurrected world in which your experience of time and space would be different, because no longer will they be diminutive, but actually doxological. Instead of taking your life away, as time does, it will energize you, animate you. Notice time will be like a cat that purrs like a kitten at your feet, and you'll never always be able to use time. And space the same way. You choose to be a place. And all my imaginations of zooming down and zooming up. If it's not that, I promise you it'll be even better. You won't be disappointed. The least of heaven is better than the greatest of earth. You see? And when I was with another friend in my last meeting with him, my friend who I was telling him about how he has to make sure that he doesn't go into eternity without doing those 3 things I mentioned earlier. I read this text from C.S. Lewis that I selected for my friend, because he was a lover of Lewis, as I am. And I read the text I'm going to read at his memorial service, holding his hand. He could hardly speak, but he was in that position. And then I asked him about what his idea of heaven would be like. It was a lovely thing to see, and he was imagining then something that was fascinating. It was like this. This is Barry Morrow is who it was, and it was. Let me see if I can find it where there. And he didn't see this, but he remembered this photo that my friend David Riedel took. We were in Oxford together, and doing this summer school program. And we were in the Charwell River punting down there. And he said, I imagine, he'd written a book on heaven. I'd imagine, he says, as my last time with him, that it's like that photo, but C.S. Lewis is in the front and Morny is in the back. Now, he knew it wouldn't be Lewis, but it's his best imaginarium where he can then leverage that which he does love to point beyond itself to a greater good he does not yet know. So the thing that got him the most, though, when I was sharing that and holding his hand, I felt him grip me when I said this. A quote from the Letters to American Lady. Has this earth been so good to you that you should leave it with regret? There are far better things ahead than any we leave behind. That's a powerful word, you see. So that if we live with that longing for home, then we live with wisdom, prudence, discernment, and understanding. That is the way a life ought to be lived, in that understanding of what is life meant to be like. And so if I go finally, and I'll wrap it up here, because I've gone over time. You can leave if you want. The last thing, these are highly selective, but I have 18 tools here. What would it be if we had 1 year to live? So I'm pretty specific. Some of these start meddling. You see, I want to medal. Principles and values to live by, relationship assessment, finding your passion and competence, your ideal overlap, rethinking retirement. Are you a sage on the road or on the road to becoming one? Just processing your unique purpose. Tips for stewarding your time, putting your own affairs in order with meaning and purpose, putting your financial affairs in order, heritage, vision, writing a life letter, your own eulogy. So it's a practical book as well. So those are just some thoughts on the book. I guess we're out of time. Am I right? I've tormented you long enough. Yeah. Tormented you long enough. Now, what's that? Do I have some more time, you say? Or what? Oh, I do have more time. How lovely. May I do a Q&A with you? Am I allowed to do that? I'll repeat your question. So give me a question.
Describe your legacy.
Yeah, I would describe it as something that this relates to it here. as I see my legacy, there are spheres of excellence. And this is a great way of summarizing that. Spiritual excellence is Christ in you, the hope of glory, and becoming so like him that he's your greatest passion. So what do you seek more than anything else? Because you're going to be conformed by that to which you aspire. And then secondly, who do you say that I am? And then third, do you love me more than these? Is there any barrier to that? So that interior life animates the second sphere, which is moral excellence, which I define as the fruit of the Spirit, and also the virtues found in 2 Peter 1. Does that make sense to you? So that in the interior, life is always inside out and top down. And so that moral excellence, by the way, is what empowers relational excellence. My wife, Karen, knows right away if I'm walking in this flesh. Relate to this matter of legacy. I won't go further on that, but I see that this idea of one of the books I've taught I did for Chuck Colson. I did this series on of books, and it was Middlemarch, yeah. Dorothea Brooke, and he had me do these great book series for Breakpoint a number of years ago, and I did 1 year, and I did fiction, nonfiction. So when I read, because I never read these books when I was in college or graduate school, I was a lazy kid. So I was forced to read this greatest literature at the best time to read it. Most people are exposed to the greatest literature they'll be exposed to when they're not ready for it. Then when they have some years, they watch TV and give opinions. So I was privileged then to be forced to read these books. And so when I read the end of Middlemarch, I was astonished. And this is part of that legacy I'm going to describe to you. But the effect of her being, though this woman had great capacity, but the problem, it was diminished because of people's narcissistic agendas imposing themselves upon her. So it diminished the fulfillment of her great potential. But here is a brilliant statement, as George Eliot says, but the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. 2 words I want you to hear. You can't quantify incalculably. Diffusive means it has a diffusing effect through the lives of others, and one life touches another. You can't quantify, you can't measure. And she goes on to say is that things are not so ill with it as half owing to those who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Do you see the idea? Incalculably diffusive. And so part of my answer to your question then relates to the 4 soils, and I'll show you that very quickly and I'll be done. So the 4 soils is this. So when you see the 4 soils, and again, the thorns will choke it. But I believe that the good soil, I'm a 4 soil ministry. I pitch my message to the 4 soil, hoping maybe some 3rd soils will buy in. I don't know, but that's God's grace. But guess what I'm doing though? I'm looking, my numbers are small. From an earthbound metric, I doubt that there's more than, I think it's a fraction of 1% of people who go to church is the 4 soil. But I want you to notice something. Their impact is incalculably diffusive. Because when I claim you cannot quantify that 30, 60, 100-fold. That's the metrics of the kingdom of God. The metrics of the kingdom of God are in relationships. And how can you quantify your impact on another human being? So I live with the ambiguity, and I'm called to live in a holy ambiguity, but there's another thing that pops into my mind here, and it would be opportunities. Because here's my calling, to be faithful to the opportunity, obedient, and let loose of the outcome. I can't control the outcome. Do you see the problem is? God determines the outcome, not me. He determines the opportunities. You think you were so smart that you got that deal. The things you work hardest on are the ones that don't work. The ones that you just happen to be at the right place. God showed up. And then you then say, my hand and strength of my might brought me this wealth. Think again. Everything you are and have is the grace of God. The only one that we participate in is, and even that's a synergy of divine sovereignty and human responsibility. And as we obey, my call is to be faithful to the process and let loose of the outcome of the results. I don't mean that there cannot be certain kinds of metrics and so forth, but at the end of the day, I live in a holy ambiguity where I do not know. But I know anytime I invest in people, I see them in a new way. And I can't resist showing you this slingshot. This has changed me. This is radical. This is a pretty recent vintage thing. I now see people in a different way than I ever saw them before. I take the greatest moments of beauty, of intimacy, of adventure I've ever known with another person. And I make that no longer a memory, no longer nostalgia. I'm turning nostalgia into joyful anticipation. My greatest images of my bride when we were dating are now hints of what she's going to be like in heaven. It's not no longer in the past. It's a glorious hint that was given to me of an anticipatory good. And so I no longer see people according to the flesh. If anyone's in crisis, so I see them in a new way than I did before, and that makes it incredible. I think of my parents like this. It was not good that they died, yet we're in a fallen world. But that's an image that gives me an evocation, memories of my home, memories of my parents, and so forth. That's Karen when she was in college. She was a beautiful woman, and she still is. But there's new ways in which I see these things that I see now in ways I didn't see before. So I find that to be very powerful, no longer living in a sense of loss and diminishment, but rather further up and further in. And so that's really the vision I'm having for us all. To God, for us to long for His beauty and His goodness and His truth, and to live a life of beauty that corresponds even in part with the glory of the one who made all things and holds the sun and the love of God, which holds all things together, the stars in their courses. It's the love of God, pursuing Him above all other goods, all other truths, all other treasures. And then finding Him, you have all things in one. Amen.